Mirë se erdhët gjithëve, i nderuar kryetari i Akademisë Shkencave, profesor Gjinushi. Më lejoni që ta nisim konferencën Qyteti shpalosur. And now we have to shift to English, to our common language. Dear participants, the Center of Art Studies has not found anything more interesting than to talk and discuss together about the city and its dynamics. We must all be aware that the topic of the city has generally been absent from the Albanian public debate. Meanwhile, Albania is involved in the process of identifying its contemporary cultural identity. The transition from a closed society to an open society has both major social consequences. Today's challenge is to recreate in the condition of the new urban space a new community of values. We need a friendly city which unites us, an urban space that creates positive relationship and increase to citizens the sense of responsibility. The city is something that is built daily through the creation of citizens and values. Therefore, there is no ideal city, but the ideal of the city. In this context, the role of public art and its impact on the life of the city also take place. Urban space has transformative abilities towards all those who belong to it, which means that to belong to it is not enough to be a user of that space, but you must become a living part of all dynamics, including public art. In this sense, urban space is an open project, all includes every citizen and every person who wants to be part of it. The conference, Unfolding the City, Art as an Agent of Transformation, aims to develop those topics in the Albanian context, as well as in the cities across the Balkans and Europe. For this reason, over the next 2 days, experts, artists, and curators will discuss and engage in deep reflection on some of these key themes surrounding the production of art in public space and the transformation of cities. I invite you to participate with an open mind and curiosity, as these days are not only an opportunity to learn about new dynamics and perspectives, but also a chance to imagine new possibilities for our cities and our shared space. Thank you, and enjoying the beginning of the conference. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stefano Romano. I'm the coordinator of this conference. And today, in this first session, we will focus on the non-univocal image of the city. What do we mean when we say that the image of the city is not univocal? We mean that the city is an organism impossible to reduce to a single image, whether from an architectural, urbanistic, or experiential perspective. Think, for example, of Lynch, who described the city as a time machine, because as we walk through it, we are effectively passing by time layered in the form of building and streets. Think of the ways each of us uses the city, and in turn, how the city uses us. Churchill once said that we shape our buildings and then they shape us. In this morning's session, we will explore how the image of the city is by definition multifaceted and capable of continuously generating new meanings. Accompanying us on this journey through the city and its countless generated images will be Dr. Vincent van Gerven-Hoey. He's a publisher and a philologist. He's director of Puntum Books, founder and CEO of Thought Open Metadata, and founder of Wood Gewerbe, the Department of Eagles, the Union for Nubian Studies, and the Scholar-Led Foundation. Vincent will speak about lapidars and skyscrapers as monumental propaganda. Following that, Dr. Alessandro Gallicchio, who is a lecturer in contemporary art history at Sorbonne Université, a member of the André Chastel Center and the research associate at Setobac. He will guide us through the world of Edhila and this ability to paint the spatialities of contemporary Albania. The session will conclude with a presentation by Dr. Angela Cecopano, who is a theater and in history of cinema, academic researcher at the Center of Art Studies in the Academy of Sciences in Albania, and Dr. Alert Celoaliai, who is full-time associate professor at the University of Arts in Tirana. They will discuss the possibility of saving theater through theater in the protest movements in Kosovo and Albania against the demolition of their respective national theaters. At the end of all the presentation, there will be a Q&A session where everyone is invited to participate and share reflections with the speaker. So to start off, please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Dr. Vincent van Gervenhooy. Vincent, are you here with us?
I am here, I hope. Can you hear me?
The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefana, for this kind introduction. Dhe van de gjithë ju që jeni këtu. Sot është një ndërkombëtar që mund të jem speakeri I parë këtu në këtë konferencë. Prezantuesi I parë. So I will switch also back to English now. Lapidars and skyscrapers as monumental propaganda. After their victory in the National Anti-Fascist Liberation War, the Party of Labour of Albania government, under the leadership of Enver Hoxha, embarked on an extensive monumentalization program to commemorate the events of the war that were foundational to the party's victory and its ascent to power, as well as key events in Albanian history and socialist state-building exercise that they embarked upon. These monuments were referred to as lapidars, and over the course of several decades, more than 500 of them were built and rebuilt, besides numerous plaques, cemeteries, busts, sculptural groups, and mosaics. Lapidars first appear in a circular to the prefectural executive committees from the Ministry of Education, dated August 6 in 1946, and I cite, "Our national liberation war has truly been a war of the masses, such that there is no village, neighborhood, or road left where it did not leave its traces. It is our duty that they immortalize this holy and heroic war of our people. We have to realize that each traveler, wherever they may pass, may say, 'Here has been fought.'" This ministry thinks that at the initiative of the prefectural section of education and the sub-prefectural sections of education, commemorative signs in the form of lapidars are to be erected in all places where martyrs have fallen. Similar lapidars, but larger in form, are to be erected in the places where our battles have been waged. End quote. In 2014, the Department of Eagles Research Bureau for the Arts and Humanities based in Tirana started a project to develop a first comprehensive documentation of all of these monuments called the Albanian Lapidar Survey. In our initial survey, we documented 659 monumental sites, of which 509 contained a lapidar. Lapidars formed a part of what the socialist regime considered monumental propaganda, defined by Ramiz Alia back then as, quote, "a powerful instrument for the reflection of the glorious history of our people and for the revolutionary and class education of the masses," end quote. Even though I fundamentally agree with Alia's characterization of lapidars as a form of propaganda, allow me to rephrase his definition in a more general manner, borrowing from propaganda researcher and artist Jono, who defines propaganda as, quote, "the performance of power," and propaganda art as this, so propaganda art encompassing monumental propaganda, so monuments like lapidars, which he defines as the performance of power as art. An ideological and educational tool, The lapidar was also expected to constantly reflect within the socialist realist cultural landscape the revolutionary progress made by the Albanian people under the guidance and submitted to the power of the socialist leadership. An important witness to this ideological aspect of the lapidar as monumental propaganda is the 10-minute cinepoem Lapidari. And here I will start sharing my screen. Lapidari, directed by Esat Ibro, based on a screenplay by Victor Gica. The film follows the genesis of a monumental site, from a simple martyr's grave in the wake of the national anti-fascist liberation war, to a lapidar built and rebuilt with increasingly more sophisticated methods and materials as a result of Albania's economical and industrial development and geopolitical alignment, first with the Soviet Union and then with China. Sociologist Julian Beko speaks about a monument that finds itself in, quote, a wave of constant metamorphosis, increasingly modified in tandem with the progressive development of the country, end quote. That during the socialist period, there was a continuous effort to update monumental propaganda according to the country's state of economical and cultural development is clear from the few locations where more recent and older monuments to the same event coexist in the same physical space, such as the lapidar for the battle on Chave Jarprit. You can here see the older and the newer monument. The lapidar for the 1st Brigade near Viskuch. And in both cases, you see a smaller obelisk-shaped 1st-generation lapidar, close to a more recent, larger lapidar constructed with marble and concrete, so modern materials. 2 lapidars in Masculora are also an interesting case, where the more recent concrete one has been left unfinished, while the older one on the left was not taken down yet. The continuous updating of monuments was in fact not particular to socialist lapidars. The first lapidars themselves were often already updated or recycled fascist monuments, as you can see here as an example, thus reflecting the shift in political power. In the 1946 circular that I mentioned earlier, education explicitly instructed local government to source the material for the lapidars from fascist monuments. And I quote, "The material taken from destruction of the lapidars that fascism has left in our country is to be used for the construction of these new socialist lapidars." Apart from the economical reasons that may have underlied this type of monumental recycling, there is, of course, also an important symbolic and thus propagandistic component to the reuse of monumental material of the vanquished by the victor. A previous memory is erased by the creation of a new one, recycling as damnatio memoriae. Similarly, previous stages of material and cultural production are negated as older monuments are updated and recycled into new ones. The destruction of monuments is therefore as significant as their renovation. This process of monumental afheving, if you will, did not end with the socialist regime in 1991 either. In the current post-socialist period, socialist monumental propaganda continues to be upcycled as the urban and ideological environment around it changes. But as we saw earlier, such erasure is not always complete. Traces remain. An interesting example is the reuse of the cover of the tomb of Enver Hoxha from the Martyr Cemetery in Tirana as the monument for the fallen English soldiers at the English cemetery near Tirana's artificial lake park that was opened in 1992. I was first made aware of this by Michael Harrison, who noticed the old holes in the bronze lettering and justifiably wondered, and I quote, "Why was this piece of stone used in this way? Did or even does the Commonwealth War Graves Commission know about this? Was it to demonstrate to the British government that after all their attempts to destroy the socialist society from 1946 onwards, that they had finally succeeded? Was it because the country was so strapped for cash that they had to look for a second-hand memorial stone? Is it meant to be a sign of respect towards the British dead, or not?" These are complicated questions that more generally are relevant to a large part of the socialist monumental heritage in Albania and its various uses and misuses today. This was already characterized by the fact that when I undertook the Albanian lapidar survey, socialist monuments were in fact not classified as such and thus received no protection under any national cultural policy, and no such policy is in place today. As a result, the process of cannibalistic reuse of socialist monuments is much wilder and more unregulated than their destruction and renovation during the socialist period. A case in point is the lapidar for Muhammad Jalesha and Shqipëri Ishmi in Tirana. Their lapidar was originally located at the Pazarieri, constructed in concrete with a traditional wing shape reminiscent of the Albanian double-headed eagle. After 1991, its bronze letters were stolen and replaced by a marble plaque. Then, with the redevelopment of the Pazarieri that started in 2017, its wings were clipped and a new smaller plaque was affixed. Eventually, the entire lapidar was removed and replaced by yet another plaque. As you can see here, the current state of the former lapidar. Different from the first lapidars or the monument at the English cemetery, there is no literal reuse of the materials here, yet the gradual material diminution of the socialist monument still coincides and is furthered by the capitalist neoliberal transformation of the city. Over time, the approach to monumentality favored by the socialist authorities, in which the technological and cultural development of the country was reflected in its monumental propaganda, led to a deviation from a more geographically accurate approach in which lapidars would be positioned as close as possible to the location where things happened, as well as a certain uniformity, that was criticized. In his report on the state and measures for the development and further revolutionization of monumental propaganda from 1968, Rami Zalia writes, and I quote, "Quite a few monumental propaganda objects, especially lapidars, commemorative plaques, and an occasional bust have been planned and placed badly. The majority of lapidars has been built the same, with bricks and ugly plastering, without any decorative motif or chiseled bas relief, and nearly all suffer from uniformity. From the other side, there are lapidars that do not correspond to the aim for which they were erected because they do not symbolize concrete events or actions. The inscriptions suffer from a lack of emotional and political content, and as such leave no impression in the visitor's memory. On many objects, they have become illegible, and on several others, they have been destroyed." End quote. In their previously mentioned report and subsequent article in Drita, entitled "Dignified Symbols for Historical Event," published on May 31, 1971 in Zuri Populit, Kutim Buza and Cleant Dedi further remark that lapidars were showing a tendency to approach urban agglomerations and roads, instead of being erected on the locations pertaining to the event they commemorate. The concentration of lapidars to visually rather than geographically or historically relevant locations, which also appears natural once we consider them as form of propaganda, also led eventually to a rat race, in which, as Buza and Dedi described, there was, quote, "a mindless erection of lapidars as high as possible, cut from the earth high into the sky, to be an absolute columnal lapidar rising upward. This has gone too far and has become a negative criterion in those executions. In several cases, the vertical dimension even has become the basic criterion to determine the importance of the event." A case in point is the enormous lapidar in Zagori, located in the vast deserted valley and amidst a majestic mountain range. It is my thesis that the emergence of the verticality of the lapidar as a basic criterion for their significance within the socialist realist landscape, untethered from a sense of genius loci, is a development of Albanian monumental propaganda that has been retained in the shared political unconscious beyond the fall of the socialist regime. This then brings me to the architectural development of what we may perhaps think of as a capitalist realist landscape, to appropriate Mark Fisher's term here, and in particular, the cityscape of Tirana. I take here as a starting point the period of the late 1990s, which saw the rise and fall of the pyramid schemes and more generally the collapse of the experimental shock doctrine capitalism introduced in Albania in the early 90s, combined with the continuous internal migration from Albania's peripheries to its center. In this particular economic and urban context, we find that, as architects Besnik Aliaj, Kleda Lulo, and Gens Muftiu describe in their pioneering study, Tirana, The Challenge of Urban Development, from 2003, they say, quote, in absence of a consolidated bank system in the country, many domestic businessmen and investors thought it better to invest in real estate, which led to an investment boom and mainly multi-storied buildings. Thus, and I continue quoting, the logic of the new economic system and the absence of basic infrastructure in the newly developed areas of the city encouraged a vertical architecture. This then led to the construction of the first high-rises, such as the Infosoft building, Sky Tower, and the Twin Towers. I want to connect the emergence of vertical architecture in Tirana explicitly to the construction of lapidaries, which during the socialist regime were an expression of the social, technological, and economic state of the country. Similarly, high-rise construction in Tirana was and remains a direct result and expression of the social, technological, and economic conditions in Albania. Initially, this result may have been spontaneous and emergent, rather than the result of a government-led attempt at designing a capitalist realist form of monumental propaganda, but I would argue that this is precisely what happened over the last 2 decades, as the demographic and urbanistic necessities for high-rise construction receded to the background. We can pinpoint the beginning of the tenure of Edi Rama as mayor of Tirana in 2000 as the moment where the state started to reassert its authority over public space after a decade of weak state power, informality, and rampant illegal construction practices. The destruction of illegal structures, as well as the repainting of the facades of socialist apartment blocks, took place under the banner of a return to identity. This project was mainly financed through the revenues from issuing building permits for high-rises to construction companies, thus providing a further spin to the flywheel of, quote, aggressive multi-stories architecture. Indeed, up to this day, construction permit revenues remain a core component of the municipal budget of Tirana, making the successful management of the city dependent on never-ending construction cycles. In order to bring an overarching structure to the rampant urbanism of Tirana, and as part of his re-election campaign in 2003, Rama initiated an architectural master plan competition called Tirana, a New European Capital City. In many ways, this competition was a watershed moment with regards to urban development in Tirana, in the sense that it determined the orientation of Tirana's further growth. Horizontal or vertical, widening or densification. The answer to this question was provided by the winning competitor, Architecture Studio, whose master plan proposal aimed, as architecture scholar Odeta Durmushi describes it, to, quote, not to turn down the monuments, but instead to erect others, and hence reshape the skyline of the city, which in turn, quote, may cause the existing buildings to lose their monumentality. The other monuments in question here are the 8 high-rise buildings that Architecture Studio planned as punctuations, what I call them, around the city center, which you can see here, creating, quote, a new silhouette that aims at the heights, providing a reimagination of the socialist realist monuments of the past into capitalist realist monuments of the present. It took a few years for the so-called French plan to start materializing, in part because of the intervening tenure of Rama's political rival, Luzum Basha, between 2011 and 2015 as mayor of Tirana, but also because in the first decade of the 2000s, the governmental framework and the specific economic conditions for the construction of high-rises requiring substantial capital investments were simply not yet in place. The French plan only provided a vision, but the years following Rama's first national electoral victory in 2013 and the installation of Rama's key ally Irion Viliai as mayor of Tirana in 2015 created the necessary conditions for its implementation. The Skanderbeg Square renovation designed by 51N4E and André Sala, a former student of Rama, started in 2016, and in the same year, the first high-rise of the French plan, the TID Tower, also designed by 51N4E, saw its completion. This high-rise then became the site, quite appropriately, for the public consultation rounds concerning the Tirana 2030 General Local Plan developed by the Italian architect Stefano Boeri. Whereas Architecture Studio had provided Rama with a new monumental vision of Tirana, of high-rises punctuating the new skyline, Boeri provided its concrete implementation path. Horizontal development and urban sprawl would be definitely limited by means of an orbital forest. Verticalization would be enacted not only around the city center, but all around the city through so-called transformation zones. Boeri's plan also cemented the economical model that had heretofore been absent, namely the public-private partnership. The need for the creation of, quote, joint structures of municipality and private business had already been intimated by Aliai's 2003 report, but now found an actual implementation through territorial planning and legislation, opening the way to massive privatization of public property and money streams that were kept largely from public view. As a result, the completion of the TID Tower was followed in rapid succession by Henning Larsen's Eyes of Tirana, Arkea Associati's Forever Green Tower, and the National Stadium of Albania with Tower, MVRDV's Downtown 1, and the Skanderbeg building, here on the right, both with a nationalist architectural motif. Peter Wilson and Atelier 4's Intercontinental Hotel to the left, Stefano Boeri's forest, among many of buildings that Stefano Boeri was able to build in the city after his plan, and then also 51N4E's book building, among dozens of other projects, often usurping valuable public space and green areas. As little is publicly known about the details of these projects, such as their precise function within the Tirana urban fabric, their financiers, their builders, their owners, or their actual designers, geographers Daniel Göhler and Dimitar Koka speak here of a, quote, a stealth urbanism. These projects were not accepted without resistance. A notable example is the redevelopment of the National Theatre by Bjarke Ingels, which would include several high-rises built on public land. The public outrage even led Rama to exclaim, and I quote here from 2000, this is a quote from 2020, "There are no towers there. There will be no towers built there. Inside, outside, behind the entire perimeter, there are no towers." So this is a direct quote. Obviously, there are going to be towers. Back in 2003, Aliai predicted that the densification of Tirana's center through the conversion of single-story to multi-story buildings would last for at least 15 to 20 years, slowing down over time. But we are now beyond the 20-year mark, and if anything, we are in the midst of an unprecedented acceleration. Whereas in the 1990s and throughout the first 2 decades of the third millennium, Tirana's architectural development could at least be justified by its rising population, this argument has now all but disappeared. Population growth in Tirana has ground to a halt, with an increase of merely 5,700 people in 2023. Overall, the population in Albania has been decreasing since at least 2018, while in the same period more than 8,000 building permits were issued in Tirana alone. nearly 53,000 apartments in Tirana are empty. Yet real estate prices have skyrocketed, and in terms of inner city property prices relative to income, Tirana is one of the world's most expensive cities at this moment. Tirana's urban development appears to have become untethered from its primary motivation, population growth. Hence the question, what is the function and signification of the continued high-rise construction in Tirana? The economic reason for this frantic construction activity is the same reason that has helped the Socialist Party to its resounding electoral victories in 2017. The massive production of cannabis all across the country, whose criminal proceeds were then reinvested by criminal groups into achieving a dominant position in the cross-Atlantic cocaine trade, as well as interventions into the democratic electoral process on behalf of the ruling party, and the subsequent laundering of those proceeds in construction projects facilitated precisely by Rama's complete grip on construction permits and expropriation policies through the National Territorial Council, which he presides. Göhler and Coca speak somewhat more cautiously about, quote, activities that are, quote, in the interest of a relatively small elite group of investors trying to formalize their capital in connection with speculative objects. This novel economical model, which uses the different stages of the construction and destruction cycle of buildings as opportunities for massive movement, has been amply documented in international reports. But I'm interested here more in how this model expressed itself within the urban landscape of Tirana, namely through even larger high-rises. More recently, the second generation of high-rises, whose completion followed on the heels of the Tirana 2030 General Local Plan, has been overtaken by a series of projects that have been approved, but whose concrete materialization still remains to be seen. These are truly skyscrapers, rising up taller than 200 meters, and we have, for example, Cebra's vertical rock jungle called Mount Tirana, Valerio Oggiato, the comeback kid with the Grand Park skyline, Ricardo Bofill's brutalist fantasy from Blade Runner, here called Tirana Tour, Oda's Bond Tower, and ultimately there is a plan for Tirana's first super tall building, higher than 300 meters, the Tirana Society Towers, designed by Chilean architect Alejandro Aravena. That this enormous complex, whose inhabitants are yet unaccounted for, would be built on a site called Groppa, named after the enormous hole that was left there after Haydn Sedia, the so-called investor in the first luxury hotel of Tirana, absconded with all the money in the early 1990s, should give us pause. As has already been suggested by art theorist Junida Gashi, quote, the totalizing impulse we detect in Rama's artistic and aesthetic endeavors evokes the notion of total design, of architecture as the driving force in the transformation of Albania. This then allows us to return to the initial definition through which we tried to understand the function of lapidars in the Albanian cultural landscape. Propaganda art is the performance of power as art. In this precise sense, the Tirana high-rises of the Rama regime, described as detached monoliths alienated from the urban fabric, are a form of monumental propaganda, a concrete manifestation of Rama's, quote, amazing visions. This is a quote by Elia Zengelis, an architect. And as writer and dissident Fatos Lubonia already intimated in 2005, a show of his political power. As the country further empties, these towers no longer have the functional purpose of providing houses or office space. The endless parade of glorified star-architects arriving at Mother Teresa Airport to receive no strings attached budgets from oligarchs to dream up low-cost copies of their internationally vaunted designs is used as an impenetrable phalanx of visionary tastes against anyone daring to question the wisdom of further densifying a city already caught in rampant pollution and debilitating gridlock, while the millions of dollars and euros formalized through them find comfortable abodes in tax havens around the globe. What is left is a narco-texture of empty towers whose function as habitat is only nominal. The occasional overpriced apartment bought by the nonplussed expat, a cherry on the cocaine-dusted cake. But these towers perform. They show the total power of a leader over his territory, such that each traveler, wherever they may pass, may say, "Here has been laundered." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vincent. This was very interesting speech. So we are starting to shape the idea of the image of the city, and we started from Tirana, so from the city where we are now. Now we are exactly in time, so we will have a coffee break, and then we will continue with the next speaker, is Dr. Alessandro Gallicchio, who is here with us. Thank you, and see you in 30 minutes.